when Julia very kindly invited me. It was back in January, and I found this capture. Oh, and I don't know if it's visible for you on the screen, but this is from January, where Twitter, which again I did do my PhD on, had suddenly become a space where women's photos were being weaponized and declothingified. And Venezuela was the president of Venezuela had been kidnapped, and there was a potential invasion of Greenland. And doesn't that all seem quaint now, a few months later? That was only January. And that is part of the times that we are talking about, right? The Star Wars visual over some very strange and things that would have been unthinkable even a few years back. Now, outside of karaoke, who am I to talk to you about this? Well, yesterday, as I was driving up, I stopped in Port Dover, where I've never been. It's about an hour and a bit down on the lake, and my 20-year-old kid is working there for the summer as the sound tech person at the Lighthouse Theatre. So if you have a chance to go to Port Dover, to the Lighthouse, look for the curly mop. We went to the Dairy Queen, and at the Dairy Queen they have the coffee news. Do you folks know what I mean by the coffee news, right? Every little town has it. I love them. You get your little trivia questions, etc., etc. Well, sure, I've been in digital learning for 100 years, but who am I? I'm an Aquarius. Are there any Aquarians in the room? Okay, the coffee news says that it is our destiny to have this conversation this week. So with that high level of credential, this was literally my horoscope for this week. I mean, meant to be. With that high level of credential, I just wanted to start the talk because I'd like to know a little bit about you folks as well. So I did put a few Mentimeter questions into this. And you can tell me your sign, but I don't normally do keynotes that way. So tell me your roles at the institution, tell me your interests. The code to get into menti.com if you want to participate is 776-964979. And if you haven't used Menti, I like it because it's only collecting my data, it's not collecting yours, and it will give us a sense of Gemini, thank you, and a fellow air sign. It will give me a sense of who is in the room, and I'd love to know what you also do at the institution. Okay, we got some experiential education, academic advisor, associate professor, dancer, amazing, core staff support. Sagittarius, Scorpio, nurse, Leo obviously, visual artist, love this, biology, ed tech, STEM education. I may in future ask people their signs. This is actually working, this is great. This just gives me a sense of kind of who we all are on this shared journey that we are on. I'm going to give this about 5 more seconds. Graduate student, STEM education, teaching intensive, Jedi Knight. Ooh, show yourself. That's got to be you, Matt Claire. Future of learning, outdoor enthusiast, learning strategist, community engaged. Okay. We clearly, especially with the I love the large collection of Virgos in the center. Virgos are important to every institution. We have an excellent group of people here to have this conversation today. So, my key ideas for today, sort of the menu is we're going to talk a little bit about digital infrastructures, because I don't think that it is reasonable to talk about artificial intelligence and both the things that it can do, but also that it can do, well, do for us and do to us, perhaps, without thinking about it from an infrastructure point of view. And I'd like to lay it across the map of some of the history of digital infrastructures and some of the things that we've seen digital kind of already do, or some of the turns that it's already taken in the world. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk a little bit about something called the empire of AI, or big AI. And then we're going to talk about agency and how humans can do the Jedi thing of resistance to some of the empire forces that big AI, not necessarily the cool little like AI stuff that you are doing your own self, but that big AI can do to us. This is Houston, I believe. And Houston it's a big city, it has an infrastructure all around us, right? A freeway is an infrastructure that people move around on, but it is built on a landscape. Anybody remember the information superhighway? Right? To an extent, we are kind of all on our information freeways, but the problem with infrastructures is that if we don't understand the landscape that they're entering and the way that they're built, then when things happen, we can get flooded. This is the same highway twice. The second time, obviously, is after a major flood. And dude in the white truck at the front probably was not expecting this to happen on a given Tuesday to him, but the infrastructure that he was on was not robust enough to prevent that situation. And we have a quote here, and you'll notice that most of the things that I'm quoting in this talk are actually theorists and thinkers from 30, 40 years ago. Because as much as we think of AI as a shiny new thing, actually the infrastructures and forces that it is bringing to bear on us are things that people have been thinking about well for a long time. And so Donna Haraway said, and I can't see the top corner, so technology is not neutral. We're inside of what we make, just like poor dude in the white truck is inside of his truck. And we are living in a world of connections, and it matters which ones get made and unmade. And I want to think about what we can make, and maybe even what we need to unmake. Many years ago, somebody that I respected very much in my field of digital technology said to me, and I've looked for a citation for this and I can't find it. So this is sort of a maxim that was passed down to me. But he said there are three logics in society, and this was in relation to the work that we were doing in early digital technologies. There's the logic of business, which is profit, right? You want to make money doing things. You need to have a business case or a business model. There's the logic of media, and we live in a world where attention economy, eyeballs on what you put out there matters, right? You want people to see the things you do. But there's also the logic of education. And the point that he was making was that the logic of education is something separate from those two things, and it's very important to keep a balance in the society that we live in, particularly if we want that society to be a democracy. Because the logic of education focuses on that idea of the public good, and even more simply, the public, right? It is a logic that values, that has very deeply built-in values of public good and knowledge as a human inheritance and even a commons. And for many of us who worked in early digital education, what we were building, in our own minds was knowledge commons. And to some extent, that knowledge commons has shifted a little bit, or very significantly, because of the infrastructure on which we built it. We are, I think many of us, sort of dude in the white truck, sitting there going, oh my goodness. But I want to turn this back to you again, and I just want to know if I can collect a little bit of a sense of what one word, two words that matter the most to you about the idea of education. What are the values or the beliefs that you hold, that you think education takes up in the world? And I love the very two first things on the screen: justice, liberation, democracy, thank you, equity, accessibility, inclusion, relationships, yes, critical consciousness, absolutely, honesty, collaboration, critical thinking, freedom, bell hooks, practice of freedom, community capacity, mastery, belonging. That's a lot of my work has moved to belonging. So I'm really appreciating these expertise. And these are not all completely aligned, right? Mastery and expertise are very important parts of that logic of education. Also, things like justice and equity are very important parts of that logic of education. These are a beautiful set of words that represent what we do in the world, and at a core level, why we do it. And what I want to talk about today is how important these are and how we can draw on them in this time that we are in. So I'm going to move this forward in about 2-3 seconds. What you can become. I love that. The challenge. Do we have any fellow 70s children in here who also coveted the Fisher-Price takeaway schoolhouse? A prime item of my childhood. You could open it up and the little teacher in the desks, fabulous. But this is no longer, if it ever was, what a school is. Right? We are now, all of us, our institutions are cobbled together, not just through buildings, but through a mishmash of often not entirely interoperable digital infrastructures that are governed by logics that are very different from the logics or the values that you just shared. Originally, the Web 2, does anybody remember Web 2.0? Oh, my friends, my people. The Web 2.0 era of digital was very participatory, and it was much more overtly built on some of those education values that you shared. It was about creating that commons of connections that contributed to the idea of knowledge abundance, right? That there is all of this out there, and you two and your students can contribute ideas to it. But we built a lot of those ideas on platforms like Twitter. And those platforms, while they started very much valuing the participatory, they eventually began to push that aside for profit. And so, now, to an extent, I love this picture of the bathroom. I feel like for me, certainly my experience of Twitter, which is both where it was the site of my PhD study and inquiry, but it was also the community that kept me going through that PhD. And suddenly the privacy policy changed, and there I was kind of with my pants around my knees going, oh my goodness, I don't want to be here anymore. And this is partly the story, unfortunately, of aspects of digital education. And I mean, this is sad to me, but this is not a particularly controversial claim. Fortune is not known as a wildly left-wing mag, but Fortune published a piece this winter about it. We have not necessarily, in recent years, aligned digital tools, educational tools, with how human learning actually works. Evidence indicates that indiscriminate digital expansion has weakened learning environments rather than strengthened them. So that is part of the digital infrastructure that, to an extent, we are all committed, and we are driving on that, what used to be the information superhighway, in our little white trucks. And now, on that superhighway, in the infrastructure, is the giant elephant in the room, which is AI. And it is eating up every conversation, not just about digital, but about education more broadly. I would love your opinions. All are valid. I think GenAI is, and by GenAI I mean generative AI, things like ChatGPT, things like Claude, a dystopian nightmare, a sometimes useful tool, a glorious future, or all of the above. And I see that the sometimes useful tools, the all of the above, and the dystopian nightmares are all kind of going up neck and neck. We'll see how we go. We'll give it a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, I should say. All right. Fabulous. Thank you for the input. I agree with you. I think GenAI is a sometimes useful tool, especially when we look at it from the immediate sort of on-the-desk level of what it can do for the specific purposes that you have in your life, in your job. Great. What I want to do, though, is take us way up to sort of the 5,000-foot view and also look at it from that perspective. Because I'm not an absolute refuser, nor am I an enthusiast. I reject that polarization that has been pushed on us, particularly over the last year. A lot of my LinkedIn feed has become particularly people who really love the things it can do for them at the right close to the desk level, feeling a little probably chippy and attacked about some of the critiques that they hear. But my point is, here we are, we're all in the truck, we're all in the same storm, and I think while we can value the things that it does, we need to be having the bigger conversation about what the infrastructure is doing to us. So, before I do that, part of the challenge and part of the reason I think for that polarization is Karen Howe makes this point in her book about Empire. Talking about AI is like talking about transportation, right? Do I mean a bicycle or do I mean a rocket? They are very different things. They have different impacts. They have different uses. And to an extent, for whatever reason, we have not, as a society, built narratives that have kind of disentangled those uses from each other. And so people, when they're talking about their at-the-desk usages, very sincerely, are not necessarily factoring in some of the more rocket-type usages. When I'm talking about AI here in this conversation, I am mostly talking about generative AI. But broadly speaking, there are, at the broader level, many cool things that AI can do. Trevor Noah is talking here with the guy from Microsoft's AI for Good Lab. If you need scale, absolutely useful. It can process so much data at once. If you have a humanitarian crisis and you need to figure out exactly where you need to get things, apparently great. Some fabulous rainforest stuff, very best, all good. Also great for, people keep saying, some cancer research. I'm in favor. My partner had cancer this past year. I'm not big on cancer. But for all of the headlines about positive cancer research, I think we also need to recognize that this is a complex conversation. We are grown-ups. Things can have good impacts and bad impacts. And while AI is impacting cancer care, it's also impacting the environment. And from a scholarly perspective, how many of you here are faculty, like research, publishing folks? AI is also significantly impacting scholarship. How many of you have reviewed something for a journal and realized, I don't think a set of human hands or brains was involved in this at all. This is a real problem. Share of paper mill style cancer research papers soars to 15%. That's a concern not just because, of the academic prestige baubles of somebody getting out 15 papers a year. That's a concern because those fake cancer papers enter the corpus. And the next time that AI searches for information about cancer, it gets bullshit. And that could impact people we love. In learning, education, broadly speaking, AI is mostly about algorithmic learning, right? An algorithm is kind of like a really complex recipe, and it promises you can do personalized learning, right? Step-by-step pathway to get to a goal. And if you're doing math or something like that, that can be very, very valuable. But that path has to be based on predictive statistics, because that's how it trawls the web looking for answers, and it's based on what is already out there on the web. So if you do the type of work that has answers that are already out there on the web, great. also can create things. If you need written output that has kind of a set format or a formula, fabulous, right? Cover letters, letters of reference, and lesson plans. As a teacher educator, that part is a real challenge in my field right now, but like form letters. If you are someone who gets 200 emails in your work a day and you want a trauma-informed, thoughtful response to the many, many students who are kind of hitting you as a first point of contact so that it can tell them effectively who they need to actually touch base with, great. You can build your own small AI model that can do that. This was from last week, but Mark Carney is now answering our emails with AI. Of course he is. We probably didn't think that he was personally sitting down to write back every Canadian who wrote to him, right? Any of those kinds of exchanges where, again, we live in an infrastructure where communication has become so amplified, we all have elements of formulaic scripted communication. Search is now AI. That shifted a little over a year ago, right? And now, unless you turn it off, you are getting AI responses to your search. Sometimes that's a very useful place to start. Sometimes those AI summaries are really handy because they are kind of pre-chewed and simple and they help you get started in a conversation. Very best, and yet. Now, I don't know if you can see the details here, and I do hope that when Mark Carney is writing his emails to Canadians, that he's not referring to any of his American predecessors or compatriots, presidents since 1945, because the day that ChatGPT-5 was released in August, this was one of the things, it said it was like a PhD in your pocket. Okay, the PhD in your pocket that cost billions of dollars has given us such American presidents as John F. Kennedy from 1997 to 1963. Amazing. Time traveler, did you know? I knew there were conspiracy theories, but I did not realize. Gilgore Bush, 2037, he's still coming in the future. You don't know. All right, look. The Coffee News said that this was my destiny, so I'm here to share these exciting truths with you. George W. Bush, at least I got the numbers right for that. There are many ways in which trawling a giant corpus of data to pull in answers does not necessarily result in something that you would want to teach with. And beyond right or wrong, because I think that in some ways that's the fun cheap shot, but this is a comment from Nick Sousanis, who is a scholar in the US, and he's talking about how learning works, and algorithmic answers are those A to B answers, right? There's a right answer to many, many things in the world, but not all of us work in right answer ways, and not all of the work that you do here at Brock is about right answer learning. A lot of learning is becoming. Also, algorithmics are not always great predictors of actual human behavior. We had to buy a new dishwasher about a year ago. I'm still getting dishwasher ads as if it thinks that I would like 7. And I'm not actually going to be buying them. I'm not going to treat myself with toilet seats or dishwashers. So, I think the real question for all of us in a time of AI, amidst this infrastructure, what we need to do is ask, what is learning for? And I have a quote here because I want us to think even just beyond learning to universities. What is a university for? If we don't understand what learning is for and what we are for, then we are very much in an infrastructure that would like to sell us out of the business of learning in the next decade. And I started late and am not retiring in the next decade. So even just from a totally self-interest point of view, I would like universities to continue to exist. I love this quote by Wendell Berry. The thing being made in a university is humanity. What universities are mandated to make or help make is human beings in the fullest sense of those words, not just trained workers or knowledgeable citizens, but responsible heirs and members of human culture. And that speaks to that logic of education, the values of education that you shared, and that's kind of the challenge that I want to put in front of us today, is how can we hold on to versions of doing this? Because the traditional learning process is flattened by GenAI's capacity, right? How many of you have ever written a 5-paragraph essay? How many of you have ever taught a 5-paragraph essay? How many of you are no longer teaching a 5-paragraph essay? Probably not, because what we used to be able to do was give that assignment and assume that in the process of getting to the output that we asked for, the student was going to go through on this kind of seesaw through the productive struggle of learning some element of writing the 5-paragraph essay, and repeated over time that gradually they would start to build argumentation and capacity to support their ideas, etc. That fulcrum at the center of the seesaw is now flattened. They can get to an output in 12 seconds flat. Sometimes you'll know. Often you can't do anything about it. But the point of the 5-paragraph essay was never the actual output, right? It was that thinking about argumentation, thinking about how to back up the things you're saying. Students do still need to learn that, but we can no longer go about it in the way that we did. As a mass education tool, right, and we are being encouraged to see GenAI as a mass education tool, but it does skip key elements of learning. And particularly if students kind of adopt getting to the output as their goal, then they won't be able to solve problems when the tools break. And we all know that the tools break, do not work consistently, all of those things. Also, as a mass education tool, what GenAI does, I love the picture on the bottom, because I think the before piece for me represents what I have always tried to make education and learning in my classrooms be, which is participatory, right? And I love the digital for that, so that people can learn from each other, can get a sense of who said what, and feel connected to that person because of an output that that person put out. But with AI, it's both, excuse me, it's extracting and it is giving answers from the same generalized central force, so students no longer get a sense of where the ideas that they're engaging with came from. And I want to think about that in terms of Ursula Franklin. In 1989, Ursula Franklin gave the Massey Lectures. She was based at the University of Toronto. She was a metallurgist, but her work focused on technology in 1989 versions as a form of thinking about what does the technology we use do to us. And her work in metallurgy, she had looked at the shift in human cultures historically from small craft-based cottage industry types of capacities, right? The things that a couple of individual humans can do to create, to the approximately 2500 BC Chinese culture's sudden capacity, sudden in the historical record, capacity to create these 1-ton bronze urns or pots. Right? How do you do that? How do you work with molten bronze to create something that weighs a ton 2,500 years ago? And she said to do so, they had to develop, I think Henry Ford would have been jealous, or he probably stole it from them, but essentially this assembly line concept, a prescriptive technology that disciplines the people in the process to not having control over the whole thing, but having a very specific part, and they must do that, and they can't improv along the way. Very best. That creates huge capacities for cultures to do more, to have greater outputs, etc. But Ursula Franklin reminds us, when we are using technologies that discipline us to use them in certain ways, they also, while exceedingly effective and efficient, come with what she called an enormous social mortgage, a culture of compliance. And this is from Dave White in the UK, and he talks about sort of the uncrossable gap between agency and efficiency in learning. And it is largely the same thing that Ursula Franklin was saying, which is if you get focused entirely on efficiency, on prescriptive processes, then you cannot have agency in those processes. And when learning itself, right, becomes focused on efficiency, then the agency is lost. And the output, right, the output becomes the thing, but he says the output is only relevant so far as it facilitates becoming. This is from The Guardian. The other risk is that AI only recognizes what is in it. And increasingly, we have all of these forms of knowledge that are still out there on the web, but there are a lot of broken links. Also, there are a lot of forms of knowledge that are not on the web, right? The web is largely still a product of the global north. It is largely still a product, I believe, of mostly male voices. And there are many things that are known and thought and understood that AI cannot draw into the conversation. I'm starting to see in my classes that students believe when AI doesn't tell them something that it is not real. And there are huge losses to our understanding of what knowledge is that are threatened by that. And yet, we're still being told, often by the Deloittes of the world and their decision intelligence, that AI is what we need. That AI is the future of education, and there's this real consolidation of power that's happening around AI as a force that is kind of meant to push us towards a particular form of education. Now, the term artificial intelligence has been around since 1955, right? It's older than most of us in this room, and yet it still gets used to mean the future. And I think that the thing that we haven't done is actually sat down societally and gone, why are we constantly being sold the future? And is that actually just something that we're being sold? Is that hype? So, how many of you have seen the Gartner hype cycle before? Okay. This is the Gartner hype cycle. This is literally a trademarked curve from 1995. Gartner is a Silicon Valley company, and other Silicon Valley companies pay them to tell them where they are on this hype cycle. This hype cycle is an established, long-standing infrastructure for how tech companies and trends and ideas coming out of Silicon Valley make money. What happens is that the innovation trigger is the release of the, hey, we've got a new thing. And the logic of business and the logic of media go to work, and they say, oh my gosh, it's going to be a tsunami of disruption. Oh my gosh, it's going to revolutionize education or healthcare or whatever. And then the angel investors go, oh my gosh, it's going to revolutionize whatever, I can make beaucoup bucks, and they put money in. And the cycle goes up, 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 the curve goes up because the money's going in, right? And then it reaches kind of the point at which they can't say anything more about this new thing. Does anyone here remember NFTs? Right. Oh, they were going to make us all millions, billions. Well, they hit their peak of inflated expectations, and then, as always happens, they dropped, right? And they happened to drop right down back to the bottom, to the point where many, many people lost a whole lot of money. And unlike many technology trends, NFTs, I wouldn't say even went back up the slope of enlightenment to a general kind of mid-space of usage in the world because they didn't really have a lot of use. But many trends and tools do, right? They hit that what's called the plateau of productivity where 10 years later you're like, oh yeah. Anybody remember MOOCs? MOOCs were going to revolutionize education. MOOCs actually were not. But they do still exist, they do still have a usage, but have they resulted in there only being 10 universities in the world, as was claimed? They have not. They never were going to. This hype cycle is always at work anytime that you hear anything about digital infrastructure in our society. And what it represents is speculation in search of a functioning business model. And I love that picture. Because where we are in the hype cycle right now is in order to keep at the top, there were no more claims that could be made. There needed to be new markets found because the AI hype cycle is the biggest hype cycle ever. And half of many countries' GDPs, including ours, is deeply, deeply invested in this hype cycle not dropping. And so rather than, because they were seeing that individual users were not going to go, oh my goodness, yes, I see the absolute value in this, I need to buy a subscription. Many people did, but more people didn't. So they went, where is the money? The money is in governments. The money is in public infrastructures like education. And so if you can force AI into all of these public infrastructures, then you can keep making money. And this is where we get back to empire, because Karen Howe talks about big AI as a particular new form of empire. It is a socio-technical assemblage. This is the kind of research that I do, but basically a cobbled together collection of billionaire business logic, tech solutionism, anti-democratic politics and authoritarian politics, and that sexy lure of innovation that we cannot turn down because nobody wants to sound like they're not innovative. But big AI, in the sense of those major companies that are pushing AI into everything that we do, they are a new empire. They are new forms of empire consolidating a historic amount of economic and political power, terraforming our Earth, reshaping our geopolitics, upending our education systems, and our future careers. This is the head of Microsoft. I love the logic of this. Oh, it's absolutely inevitable. You absolutely must use it. Actually, you're not using it enough, and it might fail. Like, oh my goodness, don't let this happen. They don't want the hype cycle to drop. They don't want the bubble to burst. And frankly, if the bubble bursts, it will affect us all because it is so deeply tied into all of our economies at this point. But nobody had to push for the internet or telephones to alter the world like this. This is a falsely constructed empire move trying to protect its own money and its own bottom line. We need to be very clear that when we hear about AI in education, again, for all there are uses, big AI's push is not about learning. It is very much as if we ask tobacco companies to design school smoking policies. Big AI's narrative is that their version of the future is our only option, because if we buy that, then we give over our agency to them. But the future that they are selling us is actually diminishing our chances of work, our children's chances of meaningful work, and also our chances of viable futures. This is from last week. New gas-powered data centers could emit more greenhouse gases than entire nations. Wired magazine. And it is also diminishing meaningful democratic process. This was a researcher this spring from the Sorbonne, a PhD from the Sorbonne, wanted to get her permanent residency to work at McMaster, but the AI that our government has embedded in the process of looking at PR applications said that it set up a completely wrong, very technical set of work requirements, like she was supposed to be able to fix electrical circuits. She's a PhD from the Sorbonne, I don't know. Most PhDs I know, I can't fix an electrical circuit. And her PR was rejected, right? The problem when this is centralized like this is it's very, very hard to even figure out how to address the decision making because there is no person who is responsible or accountable for it. And the last of these images, this is Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI. He shared some of his views recently that his vision of the future for us all is that he can sell us back intelligence on a meter. The mask is off at this point. Basically, big AI, again, not the fun stuff that you can do, but the corporations, the infrastructure, is a prescriptive infrastructure focused on control and limiting our agency. And if we cannot evaluate what the tool is giving us, what the machine is giving us, we are not using a tool. We are being used by one. But this is where my Aquarius energy kicks in. This is all a real situation. I know it's depressing. It is also true, and we are all in the white truck. I genuinely believe, are our only hope. We do not need to buy what they are selling. And it is literally us who work in education, who work with education values, who have both the skills and the understanding to try to push for the preservation of some of those values in the society that ends up being our future. Our cost-benefit analysis, anytime that someone asks you, what should we do with AI, we need to think about learning and our educational values and go back to the pieces that you put out on the screen earlier, right? If you don't see those values in what is being sold to you, you can say no. You can try to say no. I've been drawing a lot on Marshall McLuhan, who actually was at Windsor for a period of time before he went to U of T as a media theorist. And this is from a film that he made in 1967, and he says, there is absolutely no inevitability as long as there is a willingness to think. So I'd like to exhort us all to think, and to think about the things that we know about education, because higher ed and education has this really strong pedagogical tradition of emphasis on agency. And so if you've ever done participatory learning or active learning or experiential education, or Paulo Freire called it problem-posing education, critical digital pedagogies, all of those traditions have baked into them the idea that the learner does not come to you as a tabula rasa or an empty slate, but as a human who has understandings, and that if you work to connect learners with each other, they can learn from each other and grow as people. We know how to do this, and our classrooms can be sites of critical agency building and resistance, right? This is from the lintel over a school in New Jersey, and it says the public school is the best defense of a democratic nation. I hope that public school has a lot riding on its shoulders, but this is what we do, right? And it doesn't mean that we can't use GenAI, a gift from the geeks, but it means using it critically and calling out hype and recognizing the Trojan horse that is loss of agency that comes to us in the way that big AI wants us to buy this tool. Because for them, it is about the bottom line. And right now, a lot of AI usage is still free, but their compute costs are skyrocketing because of agentic AI and a whole lot of new things. And so the costs are starting to be downloaded onto us, right? And again, we have another little start. Oh, I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. Isn't bad. I want to put a little caution in here. To some extent, the agency piece is something that higher ed has sold the farm too far on already. This is from Clarissa Sorensen Unruh in New Mexico, but she looked at the ways in which in higher education, often traditional and sort of conventional ways of approaching what we do have transactionalized the neoliberal higher education institution over the last 20 years. And so if students go into their learning experience, which is expensive, and they feel like they're there to get a credential and that's it, and their grades matter, and we are very transactional about how we engage with them, then we are already not fostering their agency. And so some of this is on not just the digital infrastructures, but the infrastructures that we have also allowed ourselves to be swallowed in. But if we focus on, there are all kinds of ways that we can focus on assessment and outputs and outcomes that actually support agency. So it isn't just a matter of, oh, let's get rid of the digital entirely and just go back, to, if what we are focused on is not agency, then we are not actually resisting this trend. But there are things we can do. We can use alternate tools. This is actually Google search before the AI. So this is a way of doing search without AI. You can also use browsers like DuckDuckGo. We can choose alternate generative AI, like Justice AI GPT, for instance. We can support educators at all levels when they are calling for regulation and data protection, right? Especially when it comes to agents, because AI agents can basically sign up. A student who signs up for your course can get an AI agent to go into your course as them and complete everything in the LMS. That destroys the whole purpose of what we do. Amazon is fighting AI agents because it affects their bottom line. We also need to be fighting for regulation about this. Mostly, we need to understand that the AI literacy and the kind of positive ethical AI conversations, they're important. I think they're trying to do a difficult thing in a ridiculous time, but AI literacy isn't really about tech skills. And so anytime that you see, oh, we need students to, it's not actually super hard to learn to work with an AI interface. I'm sure most of you know that. The literacies are not technical. The literacies are system-wide. They are about the infrastructures and about an understanding that big AI is a force behind this. And even if you personally get very literate and are using AI for great things, if you become dependent on that, big AI would eventually, one, like to make you pay for it, but two, like to make you pay for it by not having control of it anymore. If you don't learn the skills yourself, then you can't engage critically with the system that you're in. So, basically, like, I'm doing a lot more process-based stuff in my classes now, and some versions of, draw this out for me, map this out for me, share it with me. I understand that this can be gamed. It's not a perfect answer, but it does at least allow me to raise the meta conversation with my students about, hey, I actually value you learning to think. And conscious of time, I think, do we have a minute to do a little bit of like examples of agency and connected learning at Brock. If you folks just want to put in something you're doing or something you know that someone else is doing, or a place that you go for support when you want to see this stuff in action, that would be great. These slides will be made available to you. And so you can kind of look to this maybe as a space where you can find things that you want later. And I'll wait. Online webinar and collaborative live discussions, performance and pedagogy, 7-day canoe trip, amazing. Drama-based and embodied practices, yes. In-class activities, ungrading, CPI rocks, great shout out. Oral examinations, go to the CPI. Dramatic arts, another shout out. Fabulous talk in real life, excellent. I'll scroll that up. Seminar experience. Community engaged experiential learning, standards-based grading in STEM. I love this. I wanted to put this here because I know that in any institution, a lot of this is already happening, but we also don't always hear about everything, and so it's just kind of a place for, if you're still writing this, keep writing. I'm gonna move on because we gotta wrap up. Basically, this is my whole message. We have been told that AI is our future. Education is actually not about preparing students for the future. We don't know what the future is going to be. Education is about preparing students to care for the future, and that will build a better future. That is our resistance. We are part of that infrastructure, each of us, and that is where the force is. May the 4th be with you, and I leave us with Ursula Le Guin. We live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. Thank you very much.